The air inside Studio 6B at Rockefeller Center is usually kept at a crisp, refrigerated 65 degrees, a temperature designed to keep the lights from overheating and the audience from sweating. But on this particular Tuesday evening, as the cameras calibrated their focus and the studio band, the Roots, began their rhythmic, thumping warm-up, the air felt different. It was heavy, charged. It was the kind of atmosphere that precedes a storm, not a late-night comedy show. Backstage, in the green room, Sweeney stood in front of a full-length mirror, but she wasn't checking her makeup. She wasn't fixing her hair or practicing the bubbly, high-pitched laugh that publicists often coach young actresses to use. She was standing perfectly still. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers interlaced with a tightness that betrayed the calm expression on her face. She was dressed elegantly, a nod to old Hollywood, a modest, tailored black dress that spoke of professionalism rather than provocation. It was a deliberate choice. For years, the industry had tried to box her in, to reduce her talent to a silhouette, to make her the girl next door with the chaotic edge. But tonight, she wasn't here to play a character. She was here to discuss her production company, her move into serious drama, and the restoration of classic cinema, a passion project she had poured millions of her own dollars into. She took a breath, holding it for 4 seconds, then releasing it slowly. Just the work, she whispered to herself. Talk about the work. Outside the door, the muffled roar of the crowd grew louder. The applause sign had been lit. Jimmy Fallon was doing his monologue. You could hear the cadence of it even through the walls. The setup, the high-energy delivery, the pause for laughter, the desk slap. It was a machine. A well-oiled, frantic machine designed to churn out viral moments and 10-second sound bites for TikTok. Sydney respected the hustle, but lately, the machine felt less like entertainment and more like a grinder. A production assistant with a headset and a clipboard knocked on the door frame. 2 minutes, Ms. Sweeney. You look great. Energy up, okay? Jimmy's in a mood tonight, a good mood. He wants to play that game we discussed. Sydney turned, her eyes narrowing slightly. The TikTok dance challenge? I told the producers yesterday I wasn't doing that. The assistant blinked, clearly caught off guard by the firmness in her voice. Usually, guests just nodded. Usually, they were desperate to play along. Oh, right. Well, I'm sure it's fine. Jimmy just goes with the flow. Just have fun out there. The assistant smiled a plastic, terrified smile and hurried away. Sydney stepped out into the hallway. The concrete floors were cold beneath her heels. As she walked toward the curtain, she could hear Jimmy's voice booming over the studio monitors. Our first guest tonight is one of the biggest stars in the world. You know her from Euphoria, Anyone But You, and about 1 million magazine covers. She's taking over Hollywood, one blockbuster at a time. Please welcome the incredible Sydney Sweeney. The curtain parted. The lights hit her like a physical blow, bright, blinding, white-hot. The band kicked into a soulful, upbeat track. The audience erupted. It was a wall of sound, screaming and cheering. Sydney stepped onto the stage, and the mask slipped into place. She smiled. She waved. She walked with that practiced grace, the kind that looks effortless but requires every muscle to be engaged. But as she approached the desk, something was off. Jimmy Fallon stood up, clapping maniacally, his energy vibrating at a frequency that felt almost desperate. He didn't just smile. He beamed, his eyes wide, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Sydney Sweeney, come on over. Look at you. She reached the desk and extended a hand for a handshake, a professional greeting. Jimmy took it, but instead of a firm shake, he pulled her in for a half hug, patting her back a little too hard, playing to the camera. So good to see you. You look amazing. Wow. The crowd loves you. Listen to them. Sydney pulled back gently, maintaining her composure, and took her seat. She smoothed her dress over her knees, crossing her legs at the ankles. Her posture was impeccable. Straight spine, chin level. She waited for the applause to die down. Thank you, Jimmy, she said, her voice calm, a stark contrast to his shouting. It's good to be back. Jimmy fell into his chair, slapping the desk with both hands. Back? You never left. You're everywhere. I open my phone, there's Sydney. I turn on the TV, there's Sydney. I go to the grocery store. I feel like I'm going to see you in the produce aisle. The audience laughed. It was an easy joke. Sydney offered a polite, closed-lip smile. I've been busy, she said. We've been working really hard on this new project. It's a departure for me, actually. We're adapting. Busy. Jimmy interrupted, spinning in his chair to face the camera. She says she's busy. I saw the photos of you in Italy last week. On a boat. Living the life. I mean, come on. Is that work? Because if that's work, I need to quit this job and become Sydney Sweeney. The audience roared again. Sydney's smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. It was the first dismissal. She was trying to pivot to the craft. He was pivoting to the lifestyle. The brand. Well, she tried again, her voice steady, refusing to rise to his frantic pitch. That was actually a location scout. We're shooting a period piece about the post-war art scene in Europe. It's gritty. It's not a vacation. We were working 18-hour days to find the right light, the right architecture. It's important to me that the history feels authentic. Jimmy looked at her, his expression glazing over for a split second, the look of a host who isn't listening, just waiting for his turn to speak. Right. Authentic. Love that. But the pasta? Did you eat the pasta? You have to tell me about the pasta. Sydney blinked. The shift was subtle, but the temperature in the room dropped for her. He wasn't interested in the art. He wasn't interested in the 18-hour days. He wanted the carb content. He wanted the fluff. The food was wonderful, she said, clipping the sentence short. But Jimmy, what I really wanted to talk about was the script. I produced this one. It's the first time I've had full creative control, and we're dealing with themes of produced. Jimmy yelled, clapping again. Boss lady, look at that. She's the boss now. So does that mean you get to boss people around? Do you walk on set and say, "Get me a coffee"? Do you have a special chair? He was pantomiming a diva, snapping his fingers in the air. The crowd ate it up. They laughed at the caricature he was painting, the spoiled Hollywood starlet. But Sydney wasn't laughing. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, watching a grown man reduce her business acumen to a skit about coffee. She waited for him to stop snapping his fingers. I don't boss people around, Jimmy, she said quietly. The studio grew a shade quieter. Her tone wasn't angry, but it was devoid of the playful vibe the show relied on. I hire the best people I can find, and I get out of their way. Producing isn't about power trips. It's about protecting the vision of the film. Jimmy paused. For a second, the manic grin faltered. He sensed the resistance. Usually, guests played along with the diva bit. They would laugh, flip their hair, say, "Oh, absolutely. I demand only green M&Ms." But Sydney was refusing the role. She was refusing to be the punchline. He cleared his throat, shuffling the blue cue cards on his desk. He needed to get the rhythm back. He needed the noise. Protecting the vision. Wow. Deep. Very serious. I love it, Jimmy said, his voice speeding up, trying to bulldoze past the awkward moment. But speaking of vision, the internet has a vision of you, Sydney. You know what I'm talking about. He held up a card, grinning mischievously at the camera. Sydney's stomach tightened. She knew this look. It was the segue to the viral content. The trap. I don't spend much time on the internet, Jimmy, she said, almost as a warning. Oh, come on. You're the queen of the internet. Jimmy laughed. So, there's this thing happening on TikTok right now. Everyone is doing this Sweeney strut. Have you seen this? Kids are filming themselves walking down the street trying to look like you. It's hilarious. They do this face. Jimmy contorted his face into a pouty, vacant expression, a mockery of her modeling look. He stood up and did an exaggerated, hip-swaying walk across the stage, flapping his arms. They're like, "Look at me, I'm Sydney." The audience laughed, but the laughter was jagged. It felt mean. It felt cheap. Jimmy sat back down, breathless, wiping a tear from his eye. It's all love, obviously. But we have to ask, can you show us the real one? Can you teach me how to be Sydney Sweeney? He looked at her, expecting her to stand up, expecting her to perform the trick, to shake her hips for the clip that would run on Twitter the next morning. Sydney didn't move. She looked at Jimmy, and for the first time, the audience saw the steel beneath the skin. She didn't look at the camera. She looked directly into his eyes. "Jimmy," she said, and her voice was so low the sound engineer had to boost her mic level. "I'm here to talk about a film where I play a woman fighting for her intellectual survival in a male-dominated industry. Do you really think the best use of our time is for me to teach you how to walk?" The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. The band stopped shifting in their seats. The audience's laughter cut off as if a switch had been flipped. Jimmy's smile froze, stuck in a rictus of forced joy that no longer matched the energy of the room. The plastic was starting to crack. The silence in Studio 6B lasted only 3 seconds. But on television, 3 seconds is an eternity. It's enough time for a producer to scream into an earpiece. It's enough time for a host's eyes to dart frantically toward the teleprompter, searching for a lifeline. Jimmy Fallon, a man whose entire career was built on the premise that everything is fun and nothing is serious, blinked rapidly. His smile didn't disappear, but it changed. It became rigid, brittle. He let out a short, nervous chuckle, a sound that usually signaled the audience to laugh along, to smooth over the glitch. But the audience didn't laugh. They were watching Sydney. They were watching the way she sat, immobile as a statue, refusing to bail him out. "Wow," Jimmy said, leaning back in his chair, trying to play it off as a bit. "Okay, serious artist. I get it. No walking. No strutting. We're sitting. We are sitting, and we are being intellectual." He turned to the crowd, spreading his hands. "She's tough, guys. She's tough tonight." A few scattered claps came from the back, but the energy in the room had shifted from excitement to unease. The fun machine was jamming. Sydney didn't flinch at the mockery. She shifted slightly in her chair, turning her body more fully toward him. "It's not about being tough, Jimmy," she said, her tone level, stripped of any apology. "It's about respect. I spent 2 years developing this project. I hired 300 people. We built sets from scratch. And you want to reduce that effort to a meme?" Jimmy's expression hardened for a fraction of a second. This wasn't in the script. Guests were supposed to be grateful. They were supposed to play the game. He tapped his pen on the desk, a rapid click-click-click that echoed through the microphones. "Hey, look," Jimmy said, his voice dropping the high-pitched persona, sounding more like a frustrated manager than a friend. "We're just having fun. It's a comedy show, Sydney. People want to see you smile. They want the vibe. You know, I know what the show is," Sydney replied. "But maybe the vibe is the problem. Maybe we've gotten so used to turning everything into a joke that we've forgotten how to talk about things that actually matter." The producer in the control booth was likely shouting, "Cut to commercial," or "Pivot. Pivot now." But Jimmy was flustered. He felt the controls slipping away, and his instinct wasn't to listen. It was to get louder. It was to overwhelm the silence with noise. He reached under his desk and pulled out a prop, a pair of oversized, goofy sunglasses. It was a classic Fallon deflection. When the conversation gets real, bring out the toys. Okay, point taken," Jimmy shouted, putting the sunglasses on. They looked ridiculous, huge neon pink stars that covered half his face. "No strutting. But we have to do something fun. Look at these. I got a pair for you too." He held out a matching pair of neon green glasses toward her. "Come on. Put them on. Let's take a selfie. For the gram. The fans will love it. Just one picture, Sydney. Be a sport." It was a test. A public test of compliance. If she put the glasses on, she was submitting. She was agreeing that her dignity was less important than the show's rhythm. She was agreeing to be the doll. Sydney looked at the neon plastic in his hand. Then she looked at the audience. She saw hundreds of people, phones out, waiting for the moment, waiting for the content. They weren't bad people, but they had been trained to expect the circus. She looked back at Jimmy. No. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Jimmy froze, his hand still extended. No. No. Thank you. She corrected, polite but final. I'm not wearing those. Jimmy slowly lowered his hand. He took off his own glasses and tossed them onto the desk with a clatter. The smile was gone now. The mask of the nice guy was slipping, revealing the irritation of a man who wasn't used to being told no in his own house. Okay, Jimmy said, his voice tight. So, no dancing, no glasses, no fun. Got it. So, let's talk about this movie then, since it's so important. He picked up the blue cue card again, scanning it aggressively. It says here, Sydney plays a character who feels misunderstood by society. Wow, sounds familiar. Is this method acting? Are you staying in character right now? Is that what this is? Are you being serious actress Sydney for the role? It was a low blow. He was gaslighting her, framing her boundaries as pretension, implying that her refusal to act like a clown was just a performance in itself. Sydney felt a flash of heat rise up her neck, but she pushed it down. This was the trap. If she got angry, if she raised her voice, she would be the difficult woman. She would be the headline. Sydney snaps on Fallon. She took a breath. She channeled the stillness she had practiced in the green room. It's not a character, Jimmy, she said softly. It's reality. You're proving the movie's point right now. You're asking me if I'm acting because you can't believe that a young woman in this industry would actually have boundaries. You think that if I'm not giggling and playing along, I must be fake. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the arms of the chair. Why is it so hard for you to engage with me as an adult? Why does everything have to be a skit? Jimmy laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Because it's the Tonight Show. It's not Meet the Press. People come here to escape, Sydney. They don't come here to be lectured by you. The crowd murmured. He had crossed a line. The by you carried a weight of condescension that rippled through the studio. It implied she wasn't qualified to have an opinion, that she was just a pretty face who should be lucky to be in the chair. Sydney didn't recoil. She grew taller. Lectured by me, she repeated. I'm not lecturing you. I'm answering your questions. You just don't like the answers because they don't fit on a cue card. She gestured to the desk, to the messy pile of blue cards and the discarded sunglasses. You have this platform, Jimmy. You have millions of people watching. And you have the opportunity to talk to artists, to leaders, to creators. And instead, you hand them plastic glasses and ask them to dance. Doesn't that bore you? Jimmy's face flushed red. He was losing. He was losing the room. He was losing the narrative. And he was losing face. He looked at the camera, then back at her, searching for a way to regain the upper hand. He decided to go for the one thing he thought would humble her. The one thing that always worked on young stars, gratitude. Bore me. Jimmy scoffed. You know what, Sydney? There are 1,000 actresses waiting outside who would kill for this seat, who would put on the glasses, who would do the dance, because they understand that this business is about giving the people what they want. It's called gratitude. Maybe you should try it. It was the ultimate industry threat. You are replaceable. Be thankful we let you in. Sydney looked around the studio. She looked at the lights, the cameras, the band, the audience. She thought about the years of auditions, the rejection, the 18-hour days, the money she risked to produce her own film because no studio would greenlight a drama starring the girl from Euphoria. She thought about the gratitude that was always demanded of her, as if her success was a gift bestowed by men like Jimmy Fallon, not something she had clawed out of the earth with her own bare hands. She stood up. It wasn't a sudden movement. It was fluid, deliberate. Jimmy blinked, leaning back. Whoa. Where are you going? We're not done. We have a clip to show. Sydney smoothed her dress. She picked up her clutch from the floor beside the chair. She looked down at Jimmy, who suddenly looked very small behind his large wooden desk. I think we are done, Jimmy, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the pin-drop silence of the studio, it carried to the back row. I am grateful. I'm grateful for my career. I'm grateful for my fans. And I'm grateful that I've worked hard enough that I don't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who thinks my dignity is the price of admission. She turned to the audience. She didn't wave. She didn't smile the fake smile. She just nodded, a gesture of genuine respect to the people in the seats. Enjoy the show, she said. Then, she turned and walked toward the wings. Jimmy scrambled to his feet. Sydney, wait. Come on. Don't be like that. We have the clip. The movie clip. He looked frantically at the roots. Music. Play something. Play her out. Questlove, the drummer, hesitated. He held his sticks in the air, looking from Jimmy to Sydney's retreating figure. He didn't hit the snare. He didn't start the upbeat exit music. For a moment, even the band refused to play the game. Sydney didn't look back. She walked past the curtain, past the camera operators who stood with their mouths slightly open, and disappeared into the shadows of backstage. On stage, Jimmy Fallon stood alone. The funniest guy in late night was left standing amidst his props and his cue cards, under the bright, unforgiving lights, while the silence of the room grew louder and louder. The curtain swung shut behind Sydney Sweeney, the heavy velvet fabric settling back into place with a soft swish that felt deafeningly final. On stage, the machine had stopped. For the first time in the history of The Tonight Show, there was no safety net. There was no pre-taped skit ready to roll, no commercial break cued perfectly to the second. There was just a man in a suit, standing behind a wooden desk, surrounded by the wreckage of his own ego. Jimmy Fallon stood there, his hands hovering over the desk, as if he could physically pull the moment back, as if he could rewind the tape and force Sydney to sit back down. He looked at the camera, lens 3, the main shot, seeking the red tally light that usually gave him comfort. But the red light felt like an accusation. It was broadcasting his failure to millions of living rooms. Okay, Jimmy stammered, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a cough. Okay, wow, that was something. Live TV, folks. Anything can happen. Give it up for Sydney Sweeney, everybody. He clapped. He clapped alone. The audience didn't join him. They sat in the tiered seating, stunned. They were confused. They had been trained for decades to believe that everything on late-night television was a joke. If a guest walked off, it was a bit. It was a prank. Ashton Kutcher is going to jump out, they thought. This is part of the show. But as the seconds ticked by and Sydney didn't come running back out with a smile and a wave, the reality began to sink in. This wasn't a skit. They had just watched a human being draw a line in the sand, and they had watched their host cross it. The applause sign flashed frantically overhead. Applause. 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 But the crowd disobeyed. A few polite claps scattered through the room, dry and hollow, before dying out completely. Jimmy looked at the roots. He looked at Questlove, desperate for a rim shot, a bass line, anything to cover the silence. Questlove sat behind his drum kit, his face unreadable behind his glasses. He held his sticks loosely in his lap. He didn't look at Jimmy. He looked down at his snare drum, adjusting a lug nut that didn't need adjusting. It was a subtle mutiny. The musicians knew the difference between a difficult artist and a disrespected one. And in that moment, the band chose silence. "We'll be right back," Jimmy said, his voice tight, the smile now completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "Don't go anywhere." The lights in the studio dimmed as the cameras cut. The on-air sign went dark. Instantly, the vacuum of silence was filled with chaos. "Cut. We're clear," a stage manager screamed, sprinting onto the floor. "Commercial. We have 2 minutes. What the hell is going on?" Jimmy slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He ripped the earpiece out of his ear. "What was that?" he hissed, looking up at his producer, who was running over with a clipboard. "Why didn't you vet her? I thought she was cool. I thought she was game." "She was vetted, Jimmy. The producer said, sweating. She flipped. She went off script. She didn't flip. A voice came from the side. It was one of the cameramen, a veteran who had been shooting late-night TV since the Carson days. He wasn't looking at Jimmy. He was checking his lens. She just didn't play. Jimmy ignored him. He was pacing now, manic energy turning into defensive anger. She made me look like an idiot. I'm not a character. Give me a break. It's a talk show. You come here. You sell the movie. You do the dance. That's the deal. Who does she think she is? He kicked the pile of cue cards on the floor. Get someone else. Do we have a backup? Is the musical guest here? Get them out now. I can't sit here alone for the next segment. While the stage descended into finger-pointing and panic, a very different scene was unfolding backstage. Sydney Sweeney walked down the long, concrete hallway of NBC Studios. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the floor, a steady, calm metronome in contrast to the frenetic energy she had just left behind. She wasn't storming. She wasn't crying. She wasn't checking her phone to see if Twitter was exploding. She was simply walking. Her shoulders, usually held high for the cameras, dropped an inch. She exhaled, a long, deep breath of pure relief. It was the feeling of taking off a corset after a 12-hour day. The weight of the persona was gone. A young production assistant, the same one who had nervously knocked on her door earlier, was standing near the exit, holding a tray of water bottles. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open. She had heard the shouting from the stage monitors. She knew what had happened. Sydney stopped. Most stars, after a moment like that, would have stormed past the staff, treating them as invisible furniture in their drama. But Sydney stopped. She looked at the young woman, whose hands were shaking slightly. I'm sorry if this causes you any trouble, Sydney said gently. The PA blinked, stunned that the celebrity was speaking to her. Oh, no, Miss Sweeney. I saw it on the monitor. Sydney offered a small, tired smile. It wasn't the plan, but sometimes the plan changes. You were right, the PA whispered, glancing down the hall to make sure no producers were listening. About the glasses. They made in Hathaway wear a clown wig last week. I hated watching it. Sydney nodded. We don't have to wear the wigs if we don't want to. Remember that. She reached out and lightly touched the girl's arm. A human gesture, grounding and real. Then she turned and continued toward the elevator. Inside the control room, the situation was nuclear. The executive producer was screaming into a headset. We have dead air in 90 seconds. I need a clip. Roll the Tonight Show Classics reel. Get the puppy segment from last month. We can't just roll a clip, the director argued. We have a studio audience sitting there. They know she left. We have to address it. We are not addressing it, the EP shouted. We are not giving this oxygen. If we talk about it, it becomes a story. If we ignore it, it's just a weird segment. Get Jimmy back in the chair. Tell him to joke about the air conditioning. Tell him to say Sydney had a scheduling emergency. Anything but the truth. The screens on the wall flickered with the live feed of the empty stage. It looked like a crime scene. The discarded neon sunglasses lay on the desk like evidence. I think I'll pass, Jimmy, the actor said, referencing the moment without naming it. Let's just chat. Jimmy laughed, but the fear was in his eyes. The spell was broken. The fun was no longer mandatory. Sydney Sweeney didn't lose her career. Her production company secured 3 new deals that month. Her film opened to record numbers, not because she did the Sweeney strut on TikTok, but because people were hungry for substance. They bought tickets as a vote for the adult in the room. The incident at Studio 6B became more than just a celebrity feud. It became a cultural marker. It was the moment the audience realized that they didn't have to accept the noise. For decades, the entertainment industry had operated on a simple transaction. We make you famous, and in exchange, you give us your dignity. You dance when we say dance. You smile when we insult you. You play the game. But Sydney Sweeney looked at the contract and tore it up. She reminded millions of people that no is a complete sentence. She reminded us that there is a difference between being a personality and being a person. As the credits rolled on her film premiere 2 months later, Sydney stood in the back of the theater. She watched the audience, real people, moved by a story she had fought to tell. She wasn't trending on Twitter that night. She wasn't a meme. She was a filmmaker. And somewhere in Rockefeller Center, under the cold, artificial lights of an empty studio, a pair of neon pink sunglasses sat in a trash bin, gathering dust. The party was over. The work had begun. In an age of endless performance, of constant noise and manufactured outrage, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to shout louder than the machine. It isn't to fight the clown on his own stage. The most powerful thing you can do is simply stand up, smooth your dress, and walk away. Because the machine only works if you stay in your seat. And once you realize the door is unlocked, the game is already over.